Hello from Portland, Oregon. My name is Barbara Steinberg, and I welcome you to this workshop on accelerating literacy, how to utilize multi-tiered systems of support, which is inclusive of high-impact tutoring for students of all ages and grades to make exponential gains in literacy. And why are you attending this workshop? Why do we all need to acquire this knowledge? Well, I want to start with an assumption. And the assumption is that our why is anchored in a knowing that learning to read is a civil right. And perhaps, like me, you never received this background knowledge in your teacher prep program. You maybe have been working with curriculum that isn't aligned to the science of reading. And all of that is okay because when we know better, we do better. This here is Simon Sinek, and Simon Sinek has the golden circle, he calls it. He says that so much of what we do in the world focuses on what to do and how to do it. And I know for me as a teacher, I have been to so many professional trainings that have focused on here's the assessment, here's how you administer it, here's how you score it, but no one ever taught me the why. And same with curriculum. And I truly believe that a curriculum doesn't teach, a trained teacher does. And so we are going to spend a bit of time in this understanding of our why. But our why extends beyond the curriculum that we teach and the assessments we administer. Our why comes back to that knowing that every child deserves the right to learn how to read. And when we look at the common characteristics between juvenile delinquency and illiteracy, we see that the parallel of 66% of students who can't read proficiently by the end of fourth grade may end up in jail or on welfare. We see that 85% of juveniles who face trial are functionally illiterate. In the research world, we call this the school to prison pipeline. And you may be aware that the National Association on Educational Progress releases scores, and they have been for decades. And nearly 2/3 of America's students are reading at or below basic. The good news is this: the delta between these statistics and where science shows us and tells us we can get to is our opportunity gap. And what science says is that 95% of students can learn to read if, so there's the qualifier there, if provided explicit instruction in foundational reading skills. Now, of course, we are going to talk about all of the factors that contribute to skilled reading, but to get to 95%, we have to know what to teach, and we need to know how to teach it. When we think about the body of work called the science of reading, we need to have a common definition. This term, although relatively new, is a body of research that is not new at all. In fact, when I left the classroom in 2010 and started this work, I was offering a workshop called The Reading Brain. There was no term science of reading. And while I'm thrilled that all these years later, we are finally having a national conversation about what neuroscientists have known for decades and decades and decades, I want to make sure that we all understand that this is not a pendulum swing in the field of education. This is research that is finally leading to implementation. I choose Dr. Louisa Motz's definition because I think it just embodies what it is, what it isn't. And she starts by saying the body of work we call the science of reading is not an ideology, a philosophy, or a political agenda. It's not one size fits all. It is certainly not a program of instruction, nor is it a component of instruction. So what is it then? It is the consensus of thousands of studies conducted across the world in multiple languages. And these studies show us three things. Number one, how we learn to read. The world of educational research and the world of educational practice have remained very separate from one another. And in the shortest lesson on neuroscience, I'm going to give you a window into the brain. That informs what we teach and how we teach it. The second thing the science of reading teaches us is what goes wrong when students don't learn. And I'm sure those of us who have experience in the classroom, we can name what goes wrong. We see what goes wrong. We see children whose sense of self and understanding of their own abilities completely deteriorates. But on a major scale, what goes wrong when students don't learn is that school to prison pipeline. And lastly, what kind of instruction is most likely to work the best for the most students? The one thing that is absolutely finite for every teacher and every student is the number of minutes they are in school. We cannot get more of them. And while there is research to support all of the things that we as teachers want to do, we have to look at the research and ask the question, what evidence is there to support this practice? What evidence is there to support this practice? It's not that X over here necessarily is causing harm or having a detrimental impact, but because time is finite, we have to focus on what works best for the most students. And that really leads us to our first question. How do we learn to read? So if we take a picture of our brain and we use an image of our brain, and of course, we're looking at the side of our brain. This is the left hemisphere. For all intents and purposes, most of language and reading happens on the left hemisphere of the brain. And I'm going to demonstrate what's happening inside of a reader's brain using two sentences. The first one is the horse was big, with the word horse italicized. That's going to be our key focus word. And then the second one, el caballo era grande, and we're going to focus on the word caballo. Now, what I am hoping you'll see is that it doesn't matter what language we're talking about when we look at the reading brain, because it is one brain. There is no other area for students who are multilingual. So what happens when a student goes to read a word like horse or caballo? Well, of course, the first thing that happens is their eyes perceive these lines and squiggles and half circles and circles that we, of course, call letters. And the eyes shoot those letters to the back of the brain. And in the back of your brain, you have what's called the visual word form area. It's like your brain's letterbox. And that brain's letterbox is not like a can of alphabet soup. It is organized into the patterns that words contained. So of course, in the word horse, we have the H that, eventually says the OR or and the SC s. And of course, in Spanish, because it's based on the syllable, we have caballo. And your brain's letterbox organizes words into these patterns so that then you can connect them to the sound that they make. Now, of course, connecting sound to symbol is only one part of reading. We read to make meaning. And you have to know how to read a word in terms of its code. You need to know the sounds in those words, but you also have to have the word's meaning. And when we see in beginning readers them sub-vocalizing the sounding out of a word, the front and back of their brain, those two lobes are lit up. But you notice they're very far from one another. And that's because in the middle of your brain, you have this area that analyzes the connection between what I see and what I say. When I sound out, s, I go, arse. Well, that's not a word I know. That middle of your brain is the part that's saying, well, that's not a word I know. But when you go, horse, yes, horse. And of course, in your head, you get a picture of whatever the word might be. In fact, you think of a picture and your mind activates like a big giant web. It's called a semantic web, where every related concept and word that you know is connected. Because words don't exist on an island, they're all connected. And the bigger your background knowledge, the more you're able to understand. In fact, if when you read this word horse and you only know horse in the context of the animal, then the sentence, she was horsing around, wouldn't make any sense. Language has to be understood in its entirety for us to be able to connect the letters and sounds we see and to eventually make meaning, which we, of course, call reading comprehension. This loop, this trip through the four regions, the four lobes of our brain, actually looks like this when it's happening. Because for a skilled reader, it's happening at assembly-like line speed. And of course, you may, as a skilled reader, slow down every now and again to figure out a word that you don't know. For the most part, all of this just happens on autopilot so that you can think about the higher level comprehension skills, connections, questions, the conversation your brain is having as you're reading. And of course, we know that for students where this is not automatic, those conversations they're not able to have because their brain's on overdrive. They're working so hard first to figure out what these words even say and then to connect them to meaning. And we know that students struggle for lots and lots of various reasons, but the primary struggle, the reason that so many students cannot get to proficiency at grade level is because they can't decode. Now, of course, if we understand how we learn to read, we also have to understand something about our amazing brains. And that is that while we're born wired for sound, print is a human invention. And it's a relatively new human invention. It's only been around for less than 3% of all human existence. Marianne Wolf says that it's like this optional accessory that has to be painstakingly bolted on. And it is painstaking. The joy of reading, the joy of language and literacy is not really in phonics. But phonics is a pathway, it's a bridge to get you to the end goal so that you can find the joy of reading. So if we do understand that we have to actually go into the brain and make those connections, it begs the question of, so how do we learn to read? And Mark Seidenberg, in his book, Language at the Speed of Sight, offers a really concise answer that has so much insight. He says, how do children learn to read? The answer is the same for all children. Now, hold on right now. The answer is the same for all children, meaning the way the brain is wired is the same for all children. Unless, of course, there's traumatic brain injury, a brain defect, but all of our brains are wired the same. And therefore, the most important instruction is tier 1 core instruction. Every child's brain requires the same instruction. And he goes on to say, cultural or economic or educational circumstances will affect some children's progress, therefore making it more difficult, and they're going to need tiered interventions and some high dosage tutoring. But at the end of the day, what they need doesn't change. And that understanding is foundational to learning and to teaching. And while, of course, I'm going to really focus on how do we intensify instruction for students not responding to Tier 1, I do that with the understanding that no amount of intervention can replace an insufficient core program of instruction. So if we understand that what every child needs to learn is the same, what are those things? What do they need to learn? If you haven't ever seen this image before, you're going to want to potentially pause and really spend some time with it. But I want to introduce you to Scarborough's reading rope. In 2001, Hollis Scarborough, a researcher, gave us this beautiful image for representing and helping us understand what's involved in skilled reading, because it is a complex linguistic process. And her rope starts over here with this tightly bound rope, which of course represents skilled reading, which is quite simply being able to read with fluency and being able to comprehend. And the image says if you take this rope and you uncoil it, it uncoils into two major strands. One strand goes down to the lower level skills of word recognition, and one strand goes up to the higher level skills of language comprehension. Notice it says language comprehension. Reading comprehension is an outcome. If we first look at these lower level skills, we see that word recognition, which means you can read it accurately, you can read it automatically, involves three things: phonological awareness, decoding, and the opposite, which is encoding, and then sight recognition of familiar words. And we're going to spend a lot of time with these three strands because when we look at the needs of students not responding to Tier 1 instruction, most of the time it's because of lower level deficits. Sometimes I hear people saying K2 you learn to read, and then third and above you read to learn. And of course, at every grade level you read to learn. But what is somewhat true about that is in K2, if these lower level skills do not become increasingly automatic, then in third grade and fifth and seventh and ninth and 11th and so on, when all of your brain needs to focus on not only what do these words mean, but what do they mean in the context of this phrase, of this sentence, of this text? What inferences do I need to make to understand this text? And if my brain has to devote any energy to just figuring out what the words on the page say, I'm not going to be able to do those higher level language skills. So yes, in K2, you do learn to read, but that's not all you do. Because while learning how to read, which is the technical phonics, it's finite. Once you know all of the patterns of English, you can decode any word. But every single student and every one of us are always going to be English learners. We are all always growing our vocabulary and background knowledge. We are coming to sentences where we're like, wow, the syntax of that sentence makes this hard to understand. We are all continuing to grow our language skills. And of course, there are 5 distinct strands representing language. And while I wish that I had the time to go into those, it's where the richness of language resides. Our focus, of course, is going to be on the lower 3. Why? Because a focus on these in the early grades is essential for future reading success. Not just for some, but for all. We're going to start with phonological awareness. Now, phonological awareness was first identified by the National Reading Panel Report in the year 2000. At the time of this presentation, that is 25 years ago. And since then, phonological awareness instruction has become known. Its importance is known. And of course, when we think about an alphabetic code like English, where we have only 26 letters that make 44 sounds or phonemes, but can be written more than 1,000 different ways. In order to make those word combinations, you have to be able to isolate and blend and segment the individual sounds within words. And this is something our brains are not naturally wired to do. We don't speak like this. But to decode and to encode, you have to master that ability. We know that phonological awareness predicts later outcomes in reading better than variables like intelligence or socioeconomic status or vocabulary knowledge. We know that phoneme awareness weaknesses are the common thread, the through line for poor readers and spellers. And we also know that direct instruction really benefits both beginning readers and spellers and those who are struggling. Now let's talk about the second strand, which is decoding. Decoding, which is inclusive of the alphabetic principle, which means that you understand that words are made up of individual sounds and symbols. It involves connecting sounds to symbols for spelling. And while there are many different ways of teaching phonics, the only method that has been empirically shown to have superior results is phonics instruction that is explicit and systematic. The National Reading Panel Report said that it significantly improves students' reading and spelling in K and 1. It significantly improves students' ability to comprehend. It's beneficial for all students, regardless of socioeconomic status. It's helpful in preventing reading difficulties for at-risk students. And it's beneficial in helping students who are already having difficulty learning to read. Now, there's two key words in here: explicit and systematic. And I want to make sure we have a common definition of those words because we're going to keep coming back to them. And maybe you're going to see how different explicit systematic instruction is from embedded phonics, for example, where we just teach a pattern when it comes up in a word. Systematic means that it's layered from the easiest and simplest concepts to the most complex. Anytime you are either a beginning learner of anything or you're a struggling learner of anything, you want the information organized from the simplest to the most complex. Since we're looking at this through the lens of foundational skills, you're looking at the staircase, the metaphorical staircase of we start teaching students the written code with just the consonants and vowels. We then teach them digraphs and blends. They read little CVC words like cat and dog and hat before they go on to learning a digraph and a blend, and then a silent E and an open syllable. And as you move up in the grade and you get to the end of second grade, you've gotten to the end of the staircase. And like I said, decoding is finite. Doesn't mean you'll understand every word that you can read, but you can decode it. It's why I can decode a list of multisyllabic nonsense words. There's no meaning, but I know what those individual sound symbol patterns say. Now, the word explicit, I'm going to use the analogy of learning to cook. And I want to start by saying that we're going to watch a video of Dr. Anita Archer explaining explicitness. And she says it's not a program, it's a practice. We get better and better when we practice explicitness. Now, the analogy of cooking is that there are some people who we call chefs who can look in the pantry and look in the fridge and they can intuit what flavors go together. And similar to the world of cooking, where there are very few individuals of this caliber, the same is true with learning to read. There are very few individuals who will just learn on their own. And then there's the pedigree of chef that just needs a basic guide. They know that a drizzle of olive oil and a dash of salt, they know how much that is. And they're able to build that same amazing dish that the chef did with just a basic guide. And if we use data as an analogy, that would represent the third of students who are proficient at reading in spite of perhaps being taught in a method that isn't aligned to what the research and science says works best. And then, of course, there's the chef, represented by the tablespoon of olive oil, who needs to be told it is exactly a tablespoon of olive oil. And when they're given the specificity of exactly how much and in what order and how long to cook it for, they can create the same dish as that chef. But without that explicit recipe, it's a guessing game. And that's exactly what reading and spelling have become for so many students. What's called a psycholinguistic guessing game. I don't know what this word says, so I'm going to look for as many hints as possible. I'm going to look at the pictures. I'm going to look at context. I'm going to look at visual cues like first letter and last letter and length and shape. I'm going to use all my background knowledge and vocabulary knowledge. And not only is that an incredibly inefficient and exhausting way to read, but eventually you hit a wall. So, if we understand that there is only one way of teaching phonics that has been empirically shown to have superior results, and that method is explicit and systematic phonics instruction, well, let's learn a little more from the queen of explicitness, Dr. Anita Archer. That video I watched hundreds of times, and every time it's a great reminder of both the design of instruction, the delivery of instruction. And I highly recommend watching and rewatching that to refine your practice. But let's move on to the third strand, which is sight recognition of familiar words. Now, you might equate that with high frequency words, which a lot of us have learned are just the words that you learn by heart. We're going to reframe that today. But what sight recognition of familiar words really means is that you come to a word and you know it like that. You know it by sight. You don't have to sound it out. You don't have to chunk it. You don't have to slow down. It is absolutely automatic. That is what we measure as reading fluency. Now, you have to be accurate before you can become automatic. And of course, practice, practice, practice leads to automaticity. Dr. Anita Archer says that no child has ever died. Dr. Anita Archer says that there are no reported incidences of children dying of practice. Now we're going to do a little simulation, and I'm going to put up on the screen, they're going to go quick, words related to the field of education. You're not going to say them out loud, just think of them in your head. How was that? Now that was very rapid. That is not the rate at which you actually read. But if you were able to recognize and identify those words, even though they're not related at all in pattern Sure, they're all part of education, but you were able to just know them because you have sight recognition. And how did that develop? From copious amounts of practice. So that your brain's letterbox back here could store the patterns and know exactly how to identify words. These three strands are foundational skills. And while phonological awareness is the bridge between spoken language and written language, and decoding and encoding is our instruction for accuracy and sight recognition is practice for automaticity, we need all of them to get to the end goal of fluency. Because Scarborough's reading rope says that fluency and reading comprehension are outcomes, they're the goals. And to work towards those, we have to teach at every layer of these strands. And how do we do that? Well, the goal of our time together is to, in the most efficient way possible, build a bridge between the knowing. The knowing is the science of reading. That this body of research tells us our brains aren't naturally wired to read. That every child needs to learn the same things. And that those same things are comprised of both language skills and word recognition skills, all of which are part of the science of reading, by the way. But that knowing leads us to the doing. Because the science of reading is not a curriculum, it's just research. The doing, the curriculum, is called structured literacy. Now, what an interesting name, because if we look at the meanings of those words, I first want to start with the word literacy. It doesn't say structured reading. Literacy means what I hear, what I say, what I see, and what I write. And we are creating literate children. And we are creating students who have both oral language and we are helping students become confident and capable in both their oral language skills and their written language skills. Structured, of course, is going to refer to the way that we build these skills, that we structure it in a way that goes from the easiest to the most complex, that we structure it so that we tell students, this is what you are going to learn today. And you will see all of that reflected as we move into identifying the components of a structured literacy lesson. Connecting the science of reading to structured literacy is building a bridge between understanding why I need to teach this to what to teach and how to do it. And we are going to do that using a very specific curriculum. And the curriculum that I'm going to be utilizing is from the University of Florida Literacy Institute. It is called UFLI, developed by Dr. Holly Lane and Dr. Valentina Contenzi. They created a program designed by teachers for teachers that I believe is incredibly efficient. It's evidence-based. Ed Reports just gave it a 95% or above in all target areas. It's affordable. It's easy to implement. It's all the things. I want to start with the scope and sequence. Because when we talk about systematic instruction, what we're looking for is that we go from the alphabet to the next stair, the digraphs, to the vowel consonant E, to some ending patterns, to R control vowels. And you see how this scope and sequence goes all the way up and through low frequency spellings and affixes like suffixes and prefixes. Now, this scope and sequence covers all the concepts taught in kindergarten through second grade. No one grade level teaches all of these. And of course, when we're looking at intervention, we're looking at being able to answer the question, where do these students have a gap in their learning? Because it's like building a house. You have to go down to the foundation. If the foundation is strong, then let's go to the first floor. If the first floor is strong, go to the second floor. Ooh, second floor, not so strong. That's where instruction begins. And of course, we'll get to how we do that. This is an image of a UFLI lesson plan in the manual. And it's the lesson plan that I'm going to be using as I demonstrate the steps of a lesson. The beautiful thing is that every single lesson is wash, rinse, repeat, wash, rinse, repeat. And once you know all of the steps, there are 8 of them, you know exactly what to do and how to do it. And although you may be learning right along with your students, the first time you do it, like all things, practice makes permanent. Now, this is lesson 84. And if we look at our scope and sequence, let's go back to that. Lesson 84 is the very first lesson of our long vowel teams. So it assumes, whoops, there it is. It assumes that students have mastered everything that has come before this. And I've chosen this lesson because it has an enduring takeaway for us as educators. I'm going to walk you step by step through this lesson. I'm just giving you an overview. If we look at the very first page of a structured literacy lesson, you're going to see some common characteristics. And in this case, I'm talking about review. Steps 1, 2, 3, and 4 are a warm-up or a review of previously learned information. Why in the world would we spend 4 out of 8 steps of a lesson reviewing? Well, because one of the phenomena that we see all too often is I taught this, I taught it the way I know I'm supposed to, but my students didn't learn it. Happens all the time. And when I said earlier that the thing that differentiates tier 1 instruction from any intervention is not what's taught. It's the intensity at which it's taught. It's the number of opportunities to practice. All students need practice. And as you're going to see, steps 1 through 4 are practice of previously learned information for retrieval. Remember in the Anita Archer video, she talked about 3 types of practice? This is retrieval practice. I taught this to you last week. I taught it to you 4 weeks ago. You need to be able to retrieve it because retrieval is the highest form of mastery. Now, if steps 1 through 4 are warm-up review, you notice that step 5 says new concept. This is our new teaching. And we're going to see what happens in this new teaching. There's a lot. And then guess what happens after that? More practice. But this time, the practice is very deliberate. I'm only going to have you practice exactly what I just taught you because I'm trying to drill this into your brain. Now, the next time we meet, this will become part of retrieval practice. But right after I've taught you something, we're going to practice, 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 practice. And then we have heart words. We're going to talk a lot about heart words. And then the very last step, fluency and dictation at the sentence level. You notice on both of these pages, I have this pyramid, right? The most overused graphic in the field of education. And I'm put this pyramid up because a structured literacy lesson builds from phonological awareness all the way up to the text. We often think of reading instruction. We think, oh, yeah, the book. Oh, no, 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 no. The book, the text is important, but it doesn't start there. It starts down here and it builds layer by layer by layer. Not all in one sitting. We'll talk about the logistics of that later. But you have to have instruction at every level because that's part of the systematic. If we want students to be able to read words, then we have to teach them at the sound symbol level. If we want them to read sentences, they need to learn at the phrase level. If we want them to learn text, they have to learn at the sentence level. One builds upon the next. And like I said, although this demonstration is going to be specific to this pattern of A, spelled A-I-A-Y, the strategies are the same regardless. I do want to share with you that everything that you're going to be seeing is in a PowerPoint or a Google slide deck that is free and available to be used by you. I have created absolutely nothing. This is an image of the slide deck. There are decodable stories we're going to talk about using. There's home practice. I sound like I'm a UFLI salesperson, but I promise I am not. When UFLI came out a couple years ago, though, I nearly cried and did a happy dance at the same time because finally there was a curriculum that teachers could implement with absolute ease and see the results of their teaching. And that's what we want. We don't want anything more than that. The last thing they have are games, because who doesn't love games? All right, so let's begin. I'm going to walk you step by step through these lessons, and at every step, I'm going to share some videos. These have been professionally recorded by somebody associated with UFLI, and I'm going to show you both a Tier 1 whole group lesson, and I'm going to show you a small group intervention. It's actually at special ed. So you're going to look at, both settings and how different strategies are used to teach the same skill. But at the very top, you see that there's some instructional notes. And of course, these notes are for us, the teachers. And it says that AI spells A at the beginning or middle of a syllable or word. AY spells A at the end of a syllable or word. If you've never really thought about why the word rain is spelled AI and the word pay is spelled AY, you just know it. This is the knowledge that you're going to acquire as you teach this to students. Now, we call these the English spelling rules, and I like to say that they're generalizations because, of course, while English is an incredibly well-ordered language, there are lots of exceptions because our language is built from so many other influences. So while it's true that English words, they don't end in I. You see a word like ski, S-K-I, and you say, well, that ends in I. Yep, because it's a Nordic language. Or, why is the state Hawaii ends with I? Because it's Hawaiian. So we have to have an understanding that this rule system provides order and it provides direction, that it is not absolute. So with that, let's begin with step 1. Step 1, of course, phonological awareness, the very first strand of Scarborough's reading route. And phonological awareness instruction is brief. And it's brief because so often we spend 10, 12 minutes doing, for example, a Hegarty phonological awareness routine. And while that is awesome, it has no harmful impacts, it would benefit everyone. What we actually see happening in practice is that the 10 minutes spent there means that when we get to the text, we have no time left to devote to that because we've put so much emphasis in phonological awareness. Phonological awareness is a means to an end. It's to attach the sounds to the symbols. And phonological awareness instruction should be done with that in mind. And so 2 minutes max spent with phonological awareness. What does it look like? What does it sound like? Well, we focus on blending and segmenting because those are the two skills that you must master to be able to both decode and encode. So I say each sound. A. Students blend it, you get the word may. S, w, a, sway. U, a, t, wait. S, t, a, n, stain. And now the opposite. The word is pay. What's the word? Pay. Tappers up. A. The word is gray. What's the word? Gray. Tappers up. G, a. The word is braid. What's the word? Braid. Tappers up. B, a, d. The word is grain. What's the word? Grain. Tappers up. G, a, n. That's it. 2 minutes is generous because, as we know, Anita Archer said, teaching at a perky pace, both for engagement, because we have a lot to get through, and of course, when we're differentiating instruction for students who are not responding, pacing is going to be a factor, as you'll see in these demo videos. But it's brief and it's purposeful, and its purpose is to move towards the patterns that represent those sounds. Phonological awareness instruction should never be an end in itself. It is always connected to decoding. So that brings us now to warming up our eyes. We've warmed up our ears, let's warm up our eyes. You'll notice that step 2 is the visual drill. Now we're looking here, remember, this is lesson 84. Students have learned 83 other graphemes, which are letter or letter combinations. We're not going to warm up all 83 of those because, again, while there's 3 minutes devoted to this step, we want it to be quick. But the purpose of this visual drill is to recall, to retrieve those previously learned patterns so that when you see them in a word, in a sentence, in a text, your brain goes, oh yeah, I know that. We have that phenomena, right? Like, you learned that last week. Why don't you remember? Well, because there wasn't enough practice. What does this look like? What does this sound like? Well, you're just going to look at IR, and what we want is the sound. The visual drill is about connecting what I see to what it says. So it will sound like this. Er, 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 or because it makes 2 sounds. Or, R, E, I, E. Because the Y is a consonant, the Y is a vowel. J, G, J, Ch, Ch, K, S, A, I, O, E, U, Mm. You notice those vowels, right? Where we had a and e and I. Vowels are the heart of a word, and it is amazing how many students, we're talking 4th, 5th, 6th graders, can theoretically read a word, but you show them a vowel or a vowel team in isolation, they have absolutely no idea what it says. The reason we teach these patterns, instead of practicing with words, we teach at what's called the subword level, is because in the back of your brain, on that whiteboard, that visual word form area, you store these patterns so that you can use them with different words. Our brains don't actually store the word as a whole. Even when we did that really quick exercise of reading those very difficult multisyllabic words, your brain was like, sound symbol, sound symbol, sound symbol. That's how fast it goes. So we need lots of practice retrieving these already taught patterns. As part of our warm up, we warm up our ears with phonological awareness, we warm up our eyes with a visual drill, and now it's time to warm up our hands. When we think about the connection between what I see and what I say and what I read and what I write, all of that is part of literacy. And of course, when we write something, we remember it. And so, whether we're writing with a pencil, we're writing with our finger, we're writing with our arm, all of these are part of storing these patterns. Now, the auditory drill is me, the teacher, saying a sound, and students writing that sound or writing that symbol that represents that sound. You can imagine by the time we've gotten to lesson 84 and I say students have learned 4 ways to spell And as I look at students' whiteboards, I'm able to assess which students have all of those stored and can retrieve them. I'm able to see which students can only retrieve 1 or 2, which students are looking at their neighbor because they don't retrieve any. And this auditory drill is an opportunity for me to do a bit of diagnostic assessment to know how much more review do students need to get these automatic. Because while my scope and sequence might say, just keep going, in intervention, I can only go as fast as my students have mastered. Now, mastery through the auditory drill, of course, and or and R are going to keep coming up because R controlled vowels were taught right before this first lesson on vowel teams. But I have to keep that practice because that is how we get to automaticity. We are at the final step of our warm-up. We've warmed up our ears, we've warmed up our eyes, we've warmed up, our writing brain. And now we're going to put these together, these sounds and these symbols of previously learned concepts in words. And we're going to do it using what's called the blending drill. And as you look at the words on this blending drill, I want you to notice that this first word, squirt, changes to skirt by only 1 sound. And changes from skirt to shirt by only 1 sound, and from shirt to short by only 1 sound. Sound is the most important element of these words, and the way that words change is by changing 1 sound, which then, of course, results in changing 1 or more letters in the word. The way that this is done is by putting a word up, and I say, this is the word squirt. Now, I'm going to change squirt. And I want you to tell me what changed. Oh, yes, the QU changed to K. The new word is skirt. Now, if we have skirt and I change the sk to sh, what do I have now? Shirt, that's right. And if I change shirt and I change just the R controlled vowel, now it's short. And if I have short and I change the digraph, the beginning sound, I now have sort. Now, of course, in an ideal world, we could just go squirt, skirt, shirt, short, sort, port. And you'll actually see this in the whole class demo. In intervention, we often have to scaffold it to direct students' attention. If they can say sh or short, good, short. Now, just change sh to s. What do I have now? Sort. Some students will go from short, we'll go through and say, now change sh to s. What do I have now? And they'll go s or t. They have to recode it because their working memory is so weak. And part of the practice of explicitness is recognizing student behaviors and knowing what strategies to utilize to help them. Know that the goal is automatic word recognition. Short, sort, port, part, mart. Whoops. That's the goal. But until students can do that, we need to provide that scaffold. What's the word? Part. Good. Look at the first sound. What does that say? Change it to What do we have now? Mart. That's right. And getting to that point of being able to conceptually understand that words change because one sound changes. The hallmark of science of reading instruction is that it is a sound first. We don't start by teaching the letters first, we start with sound. And every lesson starts with sound. Every single one of those phonological awareness words had A. I haven't yet taught you A, but I'm warming up your brain. Sound first. So we go through these words. Of course, from the beginning until now, approximately 15 minutes have passed because that's the practice our students need to get to automaticity. If there's reteaching involved, then we might need to go back and do some other reteaching. Let's just say we have a kiddo who comes to these words and goes, "ert," right? Now we're not working on automaticity. We need to go back and reteach. But so often they know it's art, but they can't get to part because they haven't had enough practice. Practice, practice, practice. We have now reached the crux of the lesson, which of course is teaching something new. And the way that UFLI is written, which we'll explore after, is that a new concept is taught every 2 days. And of course, in an intervention, it might be that a new concept is taught once a week. We're only going to go as fast as our students can master an intervention. So this new concept might not be an introduction. It might be just a review, which is why you'll see when we get to page 2 of the manual, there's lots and lots of words for review. There's additional fluency practice for review. But today I'm going to teach you as if it's day 1 of learning a new concept. And of course, the new concept is A, spelled A-I-A-Y. The verbiage written is for you, of course, because Holly and Val recognize that many of us teachers didn't learn that AI only in the beginning and middle and AY at the end of a base word. So they give us that knowledge. I start with these slides. And these slides, of course, are included on in this website portal thing. I said, today we are going to learn a new way to spell A. You've already learned that we can spell A, vowel, consonant, E, like in this word cake. And you've also learned that we could spell it A, open syllable A, as in the word baby. Well, today we're learning a new way. And the first way that I want to teach you is AI. AI says A in the beginning or middle of a word, like in the words aim and aid, or bait and mail. And we also can spell A-A-Y when it's at the end, like in the words may and say. Now, you notice when I say this word A, do you see that my lips move? A. Do it with me. Take out your mirror. A. That's right. So when we make our vowel sounds, right? It's continuous. It goes on and on and on and on. And our mouth moves. A. Good. Let's go ahead and add A-I-A-Y to our sound wall. Now, time out. Let's talk about sound walls. We'll go back to our lesson in a moment, but all of this is part of our new teaching. Do you notice in this picture, this little girl is pointing actually to A, the acorn is the key word. And do you see that below that A in the mouth is the A, and then the A consonant E, and then A-I, A-Y. And do you notice that there are 5 additional ways to spell A? When we think about how challenging it is to learn all of the patterns in English, we need to recognize that just because it's up on the board right now doesn't mean it's going to be stored in my visual memory. A sound wall is a permanent representation of what's been taught so students can use it for decoding and encoding. There is a cognitive process called orthographic mapping, which is how we learn to break words down for both decoding and encoding. In this example, the word read, we want students to recognize that EA says E, E-D. And that if they want to spell read, they hear E-D. And they know that that E is not spelled with a single letter E, because then it would say read, but it needs a vowel team. And for us as skilled readers and writers, we can retrieve that. We can see that word in our mind's eye. But if you're just learning, that's not in your mind's eye. So where can you go to look to find how to spell this sound? And the answer is a sound wall. It guides students in connecting the sounds to the symbols, the phonemes to the graphemes. Every single word that you can recognize like this gets mapped in your brain like teacher. T, each, sk, oo. And we hear, of course, students modeling and demonstrating this when they're sounding words out. And that process, when practiced enough, becomes a word that you just know by sight. But to facilitate that process, to get students to the point where they can decode and encode with accuracy and automaticity, they need something permanent. And that permanent thing is a sound wall. Now you saw the picture, right, of the little girl with the A, and here it is. If I were to give you a blank sound wall, do you think you could retrieve from your brain all of the patterns that represent these vowel sounds? My guess is probably not. Because even for somebody like myself who, lives and breathes this stuff, when I get down to those lower ones, I'm like, what is another way? What word do I know? And of course, part of systematic instruction is that we teach these in the order of frequency, and we only add graphemes on a sound wall that have been explicitly taught. So a sound wall for the lesson that I am teaching would include this. And then I've added on A-I-A-Y. I've modeled how we say it. I put it up on the sound wall. And I say, now you have 4 ways that you know how to spell that sound A. And when you come to a word that has A, you know that if it's an open syllable, it's a single letter. If it's a single syllable, it could be a vowel consonant E. Or it could be A-I-A-Y, beginning or middle or end. Now, let me address 2 things. One is, what if a child wants to spell a word that contains a pattern they haven't learned? I say, oh, kiddo, we haven't learned this yet. Great word. It's actually spelled this way. We're going to learn that soon or next year. What if the word is cake? And we know it's C-A-K-E, but they spelled it C-A-K, right? Because, hey, it's the middle of the word. We have to understand that there is a gap between the rules that we learn and visual memory. Recognizing that the word is spelled correctly. Let me give you an example that's easier. The long E, which would be the next lesson in this sequence, has 2 vowel teams, EE and EA. How do you know when it's EE or EA? There is no rule. Your visual memory, your mind's eye. You can learn that it's one of those two is the most common, but there's no definitive rule for when you spell a word with EE versus when you spell it with EA. That becomes a real challenge for students who are very impacted, like individuals with dyslexia. We can get them to the point where they know it's one of those vowel schemes, but which one is it? Depends upon visual memory. Now, this sound wall. When we come back to the lesson, right? I've said we have these two patterns. One's in the beginning and middle, one's at the end. Now, I'm going to model with an I do. We're going to do a we do. And it's not just going to be reading words. Watch me. In this word, rain, I see that it's a, n. Wow, A in the middle of a word is spelled AI. This word is say, and I hear A at the end of a word and it's spelled AY because it's the end of a word. This word is away, and away is spelled AY at the end because A at the end has to be spelled AY. I'm using metacognition to show the students what I'm thinking. This isn't about reading the words. It's about knowing why the word is spelled the way it is. Now I say, let's do these together. This word is wait, like wait your turn. Ooh, I see A is spelled AI. Why is it spelled AI? And we chorally respond, because it's in the middle. Ooh, this word paint. Why is it spelled AI? Because it's in the middle. And we go through this, and I do it as many times as I feel is necessary before we're ready to move on from an I do, we do. And of course, because reading a word and spelling a word are opposites, the very next thing I'm going to do is model how I spell these words. And I'm going to do it, and then we're going to do it. And I say, all right, so I'm going to spell the word say. Tappers up, S, A. And I draw these two lines, and these two lines represent, of course, the two phonemes. And I say, S. I know that's spelled with an S. Ooh, A. I hear A at the end. Ooh, am I going to spell it A-I or A-Y? And I write it up there, A-Y. Ooh, I think I'm ready for a harder one. The word is trail. Like I went on the trail to go for a hike. T-er-a-ol. And of course, between those are spaces, and I write these symbols that represent these sounds, and I get to A, and I say, ooh, it's the middle of a word. How do I spell it in the middle of a word? AI, that's right, because I know in the beginning or middle of a word, it's AI. Now you notice that there's no you do here, right? We do a we do. I have students just carpet write depending on their age, grade, or tier of intervention, but there's no you do yet. I'm modeling. And this gradual release, right? Of, well, why would we spell it A-Y, the word may? Why would we spell way A-Y? Is because those who do the talking do the learning. If you're saying the rule, you're committing it to memory. I'm saying the rule. And so often I just see students reading words. Oftentimes they can read the words, but they can't spell them. And the reason they can't spell them is they don't know the rule. So we're teaching reading through spelling, which might be a bit of a shift in our thinking. Of course. So if we've taught something new, we've modeled it with an I do, we've done it as a we do, now it's time for a you do. And the you do is word work with manipulative letters. This is step 6. You might ask, well, why would we do word work with manipulative letters? Well, because we want to reduce cognitive load. We want students to be able to identify what letters they need. We don't want them to have to handwrite. This is a spelling process, and it's a spelling process for the purpose of learning a rule. And it looks and sounds like this. Our boards will look like this when we are teaching AIAY. As I mentioned, this is the very first vowel team lesson. So AIAY is added. Students have already learned our controlled vowels. They've already learned digraphs. They've learned these common suffixes. So I add AIAY to their magnet boards. And now I'm going to have them build the words. I ask students to move those two magnets down because we're only building words with those two. This is deliberate practice. So why not have them right in front? And I start by saying the word is gain. What's the word? Gain. Tappers up. G, A, N. Now build the word. And I look and I see. And I say, well, why did you build it AI? Oh, because it's in the middle. Good. Now put your finger on the very first sound. What does that sound? G, g. Good. Change g to mm. Now let's do a little metacognition. What did a student have to do to be able to do that? They had to be able to know that, g and and the is associated with m because it's sound first, and then blend it together to read the word. Would I love students to be able to go from, what's this word? Gain. That's right. Change gain to main. Of course, I want them to be able to do that. But sometimes they need a little support. So I say, all right, put your finger on the final sound. What sound do you have there? N. Now change N to O. What word do you have now? Mail. Good, like go get the mail. Now let me move up in the world of scaffolding. Put your finger on the first sound. I'm only going to change the first sound in this word. The word we have is what? Mail. Right. Change mail to pale. Now, I've helped identify where it's going to change, but I didn't tell them this sound. So they have to realize that pale is the P and that that's what changed. Again, the goal is to go from, the word is what? Main. Good. Change main to male. Change male to pale. Now I'm going to jump forward. And by the way, all the time I'm saying, why is it spelled AI? Because it's in the middle. Now I'm going to go to pay, right? We have pain. And now I said, change pain to pay. Ooh. Why is it spelled AY? Because it's at the end. Good. Change pay to way. Ooh, why is it at the end? That's right, because it's A, or why is it AY? Because it's at the end. And every time we're articulating the why. And that's just such a foundational part of this instruction. Now, word work with manipulative letters can, of course, be done virtually. In these videos, or in I think just the first video, you're going to see it with students doing this on a virtual word work mat. That is not going to be the best way. UFLI actually recommends that you actually have a word work mat. So all students should have their own word work mat and will have their own word work mat, no matter where it comes from, no matter how it's built, because it's the act of manipulating those letters to build words that helps reinforce that cognitive process of orthographic mapping, that I build words by combining sounds and symbols. That's the alphabetic principle. So let's. Well, now that we have completely taught a new concept, we've modeled it with I do, we do, you do, we've practiced, we're now going to do additional word work, but it's going to be on this topic of irregular words. Now let's talk about irregular words, right? They're called a whole bunch of different things: high frequency words and crazy words and red words and sight words. And the reality is that there are really two types of irregular word parts. Some of them are permanently irregular, like in the word friend. That IE that says IE doesn't say but it does in friend. That is permanently irregular. We need to learn that part. But a huge majority of irregular word parts are what are called temporarily irregular, where students haven't just learned it yet, like the Y of my, totally regular. But they need to learn that before they learn it in phonics scope and sequence, because they're going to see it and they're going to in books, and they're going to want to use it in their writing. But once students learn that pattern, it is no longer irregular. It used to be that students were taught to just memorize words, right, on flashcards as a whole word. And there's absolutely nothing that's aligned with the science of reading that asks students to memorize whole words. So we focus in on what's called the heart part. And part of the reason that we don't want students memorizing whole words is because that little area of the brain, the visual word form area, is very, very small. It can't store more than about 2,000 sight sound symbols. So we teach them the same way we teach every other word, by mapping it. We identify the sounds, we identify the patterns, and then when we see a pattern that is irregular, we teach it with so much intensity so that students can make that tricky part sticky in their brains. I'm going to walk you through a lesson, and this lesson is going to be on the word about. Now, you notice in the word about that the OU is marked blue because it's actually regular, but it might be temporarily irregular, and so we're going to have to teach that part. The A is a schwa. Now, schwa happens to be the most common vowel sound in English. It's not that it's irregular, but because schwa is so tricky to spell, because it could be an A or an E or an I or an O or a U or even a Y, we make it the heart of the word. Now, on the back of our heart cards, we have all of the steps, and I'm going to walk us through it. This is the word about. Like in the sentence, what is this story about? Let's tap out the sounds in about. B, ow, t. Blend those together and we have the word about. The first sound I hear is Now that is going to be spelled with the letter A. And that part we're going to put a heart over. The second sound I hear, is B. We know that spelled with a B. The third sound is ow, and we know that that's spelled O-U. And the last sound I hear is T, and we spell that with the letter T. Now, we have to make this tricky part sticky. So we're going to practice. And we're going to practice, and we're going to make our voices louder. We're going to trace and say. We're going to skywrite. We're going to do all of the strategies, because in this word about, we have to make that A stick in our brains. So we're going to do every strategy that we can pull out to help students remember this word. But what we're not going to do is memorize the whole word, because this word only has one tricky part. Sometimes OU is a tricky part too, because like I said, if you haven't learned it, it's tricky. But whole word memorization, it's out. We are finally to the top of the pyramid, the point where we get to put our sounds and symbols together into words, and words together into phrases to make meaning. And you'll notice that there are 3 sentences for fluency practice. There are 3 sentences for dictation practice. This part of the lesson is given approximately 15 minutes. And what I want to demonstrate are the strategies that we're using and why they're so important for building automaticity. Let's look at the first sentence that's in the slide deck, and it says, their friend will stay here today. Now, obviously, when we look at this sentence, we have that high frequency, irregular word part in friend. And then we also have, let's circle these here. We also have the AY in stay. We have the AY of today. They've already learned there and here. And the very first thing that we want students to do is to read this for accuracy. So I ask students to whisper read. Their friend will stay here today. Are there any words that you need help checking? I ask students. All right, read it aloud to me. And all students in my small group or whole group, whatever the format, say, their friend will stay here today. I, of course, say, I'm so pleased with how accurately you read that. And you read all of the words automatically. So now we're going to work on building prosody. And I say that word, prosody. That's right. Building prosody means that we're going to chunk this sentence. We're going to chunk it based on who it's about. Because every single sentence has a who. And in this sentence, the who is their friend. So say that with me. Their friend. Good. Again, their friend. And you notice I'm scooping with my hands, right? And I'm scooping. It's visually on the page too. Their friend. Now, if that's the who, we need to have a do. Because every sentence has a who and a do. What will their friend do? Will stay here. Oh, their friend will stay here. So let's read it two parts. Their friend will stay here. And when are they going to stay here? Today. That's right. They're going to stay here today. So we actually have three idea units in this sentence. We have who, their friend, will do what? Will stay here. When? Today. And just like words are made up of building blocks of sound and symbol, sentences are made up of building blocks of parts of speech. The noun phrase, the verb phrase, right? Answering the question, who, what, where, when, why, how. And I modeled this with students to set them up for doing this on their own. We do it with all three sentences. All right, whisper read it. And I might ask, can anybody find a word that has our phonics focus? Right? And I say, okay, read it to me. And I get the same thing. We will wait, right? And then I say, okay, so who is this sentence about? We. Do we know who we are? Could be us. We what? Will wait. Now, we will wait, of course, is a complete sentence. But this sentence has the answer to where will they wait? When will they wait? And of course, if we were working with higher level language and syntax, we could move those pieces around. We could say, at the main gate, we will wait today. Today, we will wait at the main gate. Because that's how sentences are built. What we're developing right now is syntactic awareness. Understanding that word order matters. Understanding that sentences are made up of these building blocks. And we're building fluency in the same way that we would build writing fluency with creating sentences. So I say, okay, so who is it? We. What will we do? We'll wait. Where are we going to wait? At the main gate. Ooh, when? Today. Woo! Okay, let's read it again, right? Because repeated reading, repeated reading, repeated reading. That's how you build fluency. But you got to build it with the right thing. And we go on and we do it again. Now this one, of course, we have an opportunity to model that it's a question, that our voices go up like chipmunks, provide some opportunities for conversation about can you, right? Who's you? Can you what? Water the plants if it doesn't rain. The more you practice it, you don't need to have three phrases Could be, can you water the plants if it doesn't rain? Now you only have 2 phrases. But we have to provide that modeling in the smallest chunks because students aren't fluent enough to include more than a couple words in their phrases. Of course, reading a sentence and writing a sentence are opposites. I will be honest, in the time of a 30-minute lesson, I've never gotten through all 3 dictation sentences. I don't know if anybody ever has, but I want to model because at least doing one is important. Now, I say the sentence exactly as I would in the natural cadence of speech. My mother may paint her nails today. Students repeat it. My mother may paint her nails today. And then I start to read it back, right? Who? My mother. They write it down. My mother what? May paint. May paint what? Her nails today. And then I ask these questions. Now, I want you to look at your sentence. Does it start with a capital? Does it end with punctuation? Can you circle any words that have our phonics focus? Are there any words you need help spelling? Because what I'm helping students do is develop the language that they need to become their own self-editors versus, is this right? And holding it up for me. And of course, I see so often the kiddos who could build paint with their word work magnets and can't yet spell it when they go to spell it in the context of a sentence. Because that transference is what takes time, what takes practice. Time without practice isn't going to get you there. It's the combination of the two. We have set students up for success, and they're ready to take a text and go and partner read, to do echo reading, to silently read. And you notice that this text called Sunday Fun contains all of the patterns that students have previously learned with an emphasis on the AIAY. And depending on the needs of your student, you might ask them to go through and first find all the AIAY words and underline them or highlight them. You might ask students to scoop the first, 4 sentences so that they get practice reading the sentence, rereading it, and asking those questions. And of course, it's not going to happen immediately that they know the questions to ask, but because you're doing this over and over and over again, they learn that every sentence has a who and a do. Who's the who in this sentence? And you'll notice this very first sentence on Sundays that it doesn't start with the who, because that's part of what gets harder as text gets harder. Not just the words themselves, but the syntax. And you can't get to meaning if you don't understand that on Sundays is telling you when. And then the Gale is the who. This text is the practice. And this text can be done not during direct instruction, but after. For students to go off and practice. I might do a couple sentences with them if I have time, but I want to give them practice that they can do independently. They can illustrate a story when they're done, but illustrating the story is not the objective. The objective is to practice decoding. We get to the end of this pyramid, which is the text, and we see that students are able to go back to the beginnings and find those AIAY words, and once again, articulate why this word is spelled AI, why this word is spelled AY. And when they can do that, we know that they have learned it. And as Anita Archer says, how well we teach equals how well they learn. So now that we have walked through every single step of a structured literacy lesson, I want to spend a little time talking about time. I, of course, put how many minutes were for each step of that lesson, and I want to let you know that this structure is dictated by the University of Florida, and that there need to be considerations for all different types of settings when determining how much time is available and which steps should be done for different groups. Ideally, we have a 30-minute block, and the 30-minute block allows us to get through the review and to teach something new. And that's it. And then the next day, we're going to review what we learned, and now we're going to apply it. We're going to apply it with the word work. We're going to apply it and learn the irregular heart words. And we're going to spend the most amount of time with connected text because our outcome is fluency. And while every single step leads to step 8, if we just get to connected text and we're like, here, read this, then we've totally missed the point of all previous instruction. All of these steps have value, and all of these steps are necessary. And of course, when we're looking at instruction through the lens of trying to catch up, we have to accelerate learning so students make more than a year's growth in a year's time, while also balancing the understanding that we have to go back and close the holes. And the nuances of that, it's like an art form. But the structure of a lesson means that we don't leapfrog, that we follow through, spending various amounts of time on different steps depending on the needs of our students. We are so excited to work with you to help students build bridges between where they're at, where we know they can get to. We are hopeful that this workshop gave you the background knowledge that you need to apply it to the doing of structured literacy using UFLI, that this pyramid visual of what we teach combined with the how, the explicitness and the systematic, is what will move the needle for these kids because, as I pointed out before, 95% of kids, students, individuals, any age can become a skilled reader. If this one little thing, and it is a little thing, in the context of all of literacy, this represents one little thing, but that little thing is what sets a student on the trajectory of academic success or not. My name, again, Barbara Steinberg. I am the founder and CEO of PDX Reading, and I wish you all of the best.